I wish that I'd been taught when I was at school. I'm an investor, a business owner, and a money educator. Understand it better, compound interest, cash flow, budgeting, investments, recover from debt. No one explained to me, put your money to work. It's about normalising the conversation. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Money Mechanics podcast. Very excited today to be joined by Lesley Thomas from the Money Confidence Academy. And Lesley and we have very similar opinions on a lot of things when it comes to money. And actually, I was on Lesley's podcast about 2 years ago, we think. We had a really great conversation then. So I'm excited to find out what Lesley's been up to talk a little bit about what's shifting in the world where money is concerned, and to kind of put the money world to rights a little bit. So Lesley, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited as well.
It's my pleasure. So just introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are, what you do. Let's start there.
Okay, so I'm the founder of the Money Confidence Academy. I spend a lot of my time, of course, talking about money, but I do it in two different ways. I work with organisations to help them better understand the effect that the pressure around financial decisions has on company results, company culture, company communication, because lots of people in corporate think that financial decisions are made with the head, when largely it's made with emotions, and that can then spill out into how they talk to their teams, how they go about creating a culture where people feel they can stand up and be counted, not stand up and then be worried about losing their job. So I spend a lot of time in workshops with corporates, but I have a real passion for financial literacy, particularly for teenagers, because schools don't teach our children enough about money, and that means that parents don't have the confidence to talk to their children about money. So for me, this is about starting those conversations so that the next generation have what they need in order to live as successful a life as possible, and to absolutely believe in the art of the possible for themselves.
Amazing. I mean, there's two very different worlds that you're in, kids, teens, and then also the corporate space. And I'm excited to kind of get into this with you today. So let's start where we kind of start all of our guests with, what is your earliest memory of money?
Probably my grandparents giving me, and I'm showing my age when I say this, giving me 5p pieces when they came to stay with us. And I'd be really excited about getting these 5p pieces, because they were like little pieces of silver, and you could do a lot more with 5p back in those days than you can today with 5p's. And I would just very proudly collect those 5p's and see them and they were probably twice the size, if not more, of 5p pieces today. And I would kind of see them as my treasure, and I'd be really excited about seeing how many I could collect. I don't actually ever remember spending them. I'm sure I probably did
at some point.
Exactly. For me, it was more about seeing the little stacks get more and more and more and get higher and higher and higher. So I think that is my very first memory about money.
Which is a really positive memory about money, right?
Yeah.
And tell us how you ended up kind of doing what you do now. So like, what's been your background up to the point that you chose to do this for a living? Where and how did it happen?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because most people assume, I came to be a money coach. I came to set up a business called the Money Confidence Academy because I must have a negative relationship with money. I must have a horror story, earlier in my life. And that is really interesting because that kind of says a lot about people's own mindset around money, that the assumption you have to be doing something because of a negative experience. I came to it pretty much by accident, I think is probably the best way to describe it, because I'd spent 20 years in corporate life. I'd been in telecommunications for those entire 20 years. I left when my children were small to join my husband in his business, where he sells ski property in France and Switzerland. I worked there very happily for round about 5 years or so, but skiing has never been my thing. He has a passion for it. I didn't. I was supporting the sales process around the sales, didn't particularly love it. So I decided to retrain as a business coach. I'd always coached and mentored, but I wanted to have a coaching qualification with a view to then becoming a confidence coach for women who were doing as I did, leaving corporate to set up their own business, or had a small business they wanted to scale to something more significant. But the more I studied confidence, the more subjects, self-worth, self-value, enoughness, money started to come up. And that was my eureka moment, because I could kind of see how much people's relationship with money really played out, not only in terms of the money, but also their behaviour around money, their visibility, their ability to put boundaries in place, their ability to understand their value and how they showed up in terms of how they priced, etc., etc. So mine was a story that developed as a result of understanding the symptoms of our relationship with money, rather than me ever have a particularly negative relationship with money.
That's really interesting. So I think if you're working on people's confidence, especially women, and on this podcast, I know we have men and women that listen to the podcast, but I've said it once, I'll say it a million times. Women, as a group of human beings, we've not had as much time to play with money as men have had historically. Like, we know that to be fact, right? Yeah. So when you're working with women who, on their confidence, what you're saying is that you were starting to see a pattern that people were feeling not confident, and a lot of it was linked back to their experience of money, what they were worth, and how that linked back to. So just tell us a little bit more about that, like in terms of how that appears in women, in your experience. Okay, a very short interruption of the episode, so I want you to get back to listening. I just wanted to remind you that the Money Mechanics weekly newsletter is completely free, and we'll send this out to you every week. All you've got to do is find the link in the show notes and get signed up. When we send this out to you, this weekly newsletter is going to include things that will help you to become a better money mechanic. It could be things like what's happening in the markets, things like budgets, how that's going to impact you. And I'm also going to share a lot of insight into what I'm doing in my own portfolio and in the portfolio of the guests we've got on the podcast, to really just help you understand what you could do differently to make your money work as best as it can for you. Make sure you go and find that link and get signed up.
Yeah, it's the value, it's the valuing part, I think, because I think for a lot of women, we have a problem of valuing ourselves and pricing ourselves accordingly, and making ourselves available and unavailable accordingly. Because as women, we are nurturers. As women, we tend to be, a lot of us, people pleasers. The people pleasing very often goes back to something that happened in our childhood. Also, something goes back to our childhood around the visibility. So something that can happen, and an example, I always give to clients, etc., is around, you might have been in your school nativity play, and there you were standing, on stage, you were the angel Gabriel, you were in your beautiful costume, your arms were outstretched as wings, etc., and all of a sudden you fell off the stage, and the audience laughed, and your perception was they were laughing at you, rather than them thinking that was actually part of the show. They were laughing with you. But you carried that through the whole of your childhood and into adulthood and beyond, thinking, if I'm visible, I'm exposing myself, I am going to be laughed at. I'm not going to be seen in the way that I want to be seen. And if you're running a business, if you are not visible, then it's very, very difficult, particularly in the early days when it is just you, to actually make people aware of what you do, why you do it, how you do it, etc. So all of
more than difficult, I'd say almost impossible. Like if you're not willing to be visible, and whether it's online or offline, we have to, as entrepreneurs, be able to be in a room and hold our own and be able to say what we do, when we do it, how we do it, who we do it for. Otherwise, nobody knows what it is that we do. And if we can't get confident enough to do that, it's a really hard life to live, because actually business then becomes really, really difficult. Yeah, exactly that. Do you think that happens the same or the same sort of impact with people that are in employment as opposed to like self-employed people or entrepreneurial people? Do you think the same thing happens?
No, I don't think it does. And I can speak from, my own experience, basically. Having spent 20 years in corporate and I worked 10 years for BT and 10 years for who were then Orange, who became Everything Everywhere, became EE. And, I was the corporate brand. I was representing the corporate brand, and I was representing the corporate brand in the stovepipe, that I was in, which started off being sales. It then became marketing, and then it became running partnerships, basically. But I was always representing the company. I wasn't representing me. And I can remember when I left my husband's business to set up my own business, I fully expected, change my LinkedIn headline, change my LinkedIn profile, and that's all I need to do. They'll come to me. Because the thought of, first of all, having my photograph on social media, didn't want to do that, didn't see why I should have to do that. And going live on anything, that was a huge no-no, because I wouldn't need to do it. Did the customers come? Did the clients come?
No.
Of course they didn't, because I was hiding away as much as I possibly could, because all of a sudden it was me and it was my big, beautiful brand that I could stand behind. And that was a real shock. I learned very quickly, and now nobody ever believes that I had a struggle being visible, but I did, because I had become so much part of the company culture that I worked within. So I believe it's hard.
In that environment, the brand does a lot of the speaking, right? So like Orange, you're just a representative of Orange, but Orange is the one that needs to be visible. It's not very personal. I think especially the entrepreneurial space, where people like us, I am the face of the business. I'm the face of the book. I'm the face of the podcast. Like, if you take my face out of it, actually, it's a really difficult thing. Whereas if you take Lesley out of Orange, there's a lot more of Orange to go around. And that's two very different places, very different places to be. So when it comes to working with predominantly women, dealing with these challenges around their confidence and visibility and things like that, how do you think that money and relationship with money really impacts that in a positive way? And then we'll talk about the negative way in a second.
I think in a positive way, because we are nurturers, we like to look after other people. We like to make sure, family and friends, etc., have what they need. So we are about creating that success, not just for ourselves. We're about creating it for other people as well. And there is a well-known phrase that, give women money and they do good with it, because we are much, much more nurturing. So it was the Dalai Lama that said back in 2011, the world is going to be saved by the Western woman. And I don't really think he necessarily meant just Western women per se. He meant women, because we do have that sense of looking after, nurturing, making sure our community, is safe and well looked after. So I think from that perspective, that is, when women have a good relationship with money, then that helps the wider community as well. But being a nurturer and the nurturer archetype, money archetype, whilst it's great, we'll look after other people, part of the problem is we can think we're enabling people by them, being able to come to us, I'm a bit short this month, or I can't pay you this month, can I pay you next month? We kind of think we're helping them when actually we're disabling them, because, and I have this with my, with my teenage children, as a mum, I want to make sure they always have enough money, they're not going short, but my 19-year-old is not brilliant with money. Therefore, it's incumbent on me to ensure he knows his salary, he has to save some, he has to invest some, and then the rest is his to do with, as he wants to. But I find myself, towards the end of his month going, are you okay? Have you got enough money? And I have to stop myself doing that, because actually that's not encouraging him to be sensible with money.
Yeah,
and
to make good choices.
The downside. Exactly, that's the downside. Now, my 17-year-old is amazing with money. Absolutely. In fact, he doesn't particularly like to spend money. So it's nothing to do... It's very little to do with the parenting. It's everything to do with their environment, a little bit of parenting, but actually what they have inherited from previous relatives down the line as well. That has a massive impact. So for all the good that one archetype can have, there is a downside you have to be aware of. Otherwise, you can become unstuck, and those around you can become unstuck as a result.
So if somebody was listening to this thinking, I don't really know what my money story is, I don't really know. So like in my book, I've obviously written about different types of money personalities, similar to what you're saying about archetypes. You've got generosity, you've got all these different kind of styles of behaving with money. If somebody's not sure, like they feel like they're not great with money, they feel like money doesn't really come to them or flow to them, or when it comes it disappears, how would you recommend somebody start to research and find out what their style archetype is so that they can get in control of their money? Like, what would you tell them to do?
Well, I have a quiz on my website which does exactly that. It allows you to find out what your top 3 money archetypes are. And it takes you through a series of 60 questions that actually clearly identifies what those archetypes are. But those archetypes, they're not there to label you in any way, because I find it frustrating when somebody says, I'm not very good with money. Well, what do you mean you're not very good with money? And that is usually a money story. It's a story that somebody has said to them when they're 8 years of age, because they've gone off to the shop and they were given £1, and they've spent it all. Oh, you're not very good with money. And it could have been said as a joke, but actually as a child, as you take on that tone of voice, etc., and you carry that through then. Oh, I'm not very good with money. Well, you might not have been brilliant at 8 years of age, but how can you expect to be brilliant at 8 years of age? How you were at 8 years of age when you went to the sweet shop is very different as you are now at 28, 38, 48, whatever it might be. So we do have a tendency to say, I am not very good at X. And X can be running, cooking, staying fit, with money, whatever it might be. And we wear that almost as a reason to not get better at it, because nobody is born being brilliant with money. It's not, it's not something that is just comes naturally to anybody. It's something that is learned behaviour, learned habits, and then understanding, exactly as you talk about, the emotions and behaviours that then show up as a result. So it's about identifying what emotion do I have attached around the behaviours around money, and then what behaviours and habits show up as a result, and are they serving me? Is my relationship and behaviours, are they serving me?
I think that's a really interesting thing for people. Anyone listening to this, actually asking these sorts of questions and then just sitting with yourself and a pad and a pen, or, just sitting with your inner thoughts for a minute and asking yourself, what is my relationship with money? But like your real relationship, not the relationship people have told you, not the relationship you hear from friends or your husband or your wife or your kids or whoever, but like, what is it I want from money? What does money do for me? How do I feel about it? Like these sorts of questions, if you really sit and ask these questions of yourself, sometimes the answer can be uncomfortable. Yeah. Sometimes it can be really exciting. And sometimes it's a bit of both, like when I was in a lot of debt, actually, I wasn't really aware of how I got into that debt. Like, obviously, I just overspent. I can look at it and be like, well, you spent more than you were making. You made not great choices. You probably went to too many festivals and drank too much Jack Daniels. But, there's some consequence of those behaviours was this. But actually, when I really sort of sat and thought about it, I had a very fuck it attitude, because I thought that's just what everybody did. I thought everybody was in debt. I thought it was really normal. I'd never sort of sat and thought, well, do I want to be in debt for myself? I just kind of plugged into the world where everyone just put everything on plastic. I think when you sit and you take 10, 15 minutes with a journal, with a pad, with a pen, with your notes app on your phone, like however you do it for you, and ask that question, like, what do I want from money? How do I want it to show up in my world? Because we all want different things, right? Some people want to drive a Ferrari, and some people just want to be able to pick their children up from school every day without worrying about having half a day where they're not at work. Very different things, but money is the thing that greases the wheels for both of those scenarios, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That was part of the reason I wrote my book, Parents Let's Talk Money, because as a parent, you very often feel guilt because you're not having the conversations with your children that you want to be having about money. But that's because you think you don't know enough about money in order to have that conversation. And that comes back to self-worth and self-value. So the book is essentially written on kind of two levels almost, where you can take your teenage child through a series of conversations, because that's what they are, they're conversations, whilst at the same time taking yourself through those same levels of conversations. Because once you realise having conversations with your children about money, is not about, what's best, an ISA or a LISA, which investment classes should I be investing in? That's not what talking to your children about money is. Talking to your children about money is recognising where they are at and recognising what they want to know where they are at. And I think once you let go of the guilt that I should know it all and I should be able to impart that knowledge onto my child, but I can't do it. So therefore, I won't even have the conversation that says, what do you want to know about money? Because that's all you need to do. That's all you need to ask.
That confidence in the lack of knowledge actually is something that's quite powerful. Obviously I'm not a parent, so I come from this conversation from a slightly different place. But I remember, my experience of money when I was growing up, my friends' parents, even now, friends of mine and their parents and their conversations, I've been in friends' houses and sat around the table at 40 years old and heard their parents say, talking to somebody who's successful, got businesses, investments, all the things that I've got in my world, for them to say to me, but money's the root of all evil. Like people that have got money, they've took it from somebody else. While I'm sat at their dinner table thinking, but that I'm successful and that I've got money and that I've got wealth. And yet still, that's so ingrained in you. These are people in their 60s and 70s. That's so ingrained in you. You just don't even think that you're saying it. It's just like an off the tongue thing. And the more that we can have conversations, even when we don't know the ins and the outs, the more we can break that pattern of the world thinking that money is the root of all evil. And actually, I'm sure you'll probably agree with this. I am a firm believer that money just amplifies what's already there. So if you are a good person, more money will make you still a good person, but you can have better and bigger impact. If you're an arsehole, money will make you a bigger arsehole. That's just how money works.
Yeah, absolutely that. And also, as that phrase has been you swore, so I can swear, bastardized,
yeah, 100%.
Yeah, because it's for the love of money is the root of all evil. In other words, if you only covet money and you don't think about the impact you are having because you are coveting money, you can end up, not being a particularly, nice person. We can see from the Epstein files, the two biggest things there, sex and money. And they are the two biggest reasons why people get into trouble, basically. But that isn't down to sex or money being evil. It is down to the individual and their behaviour with those two things. And I think when somebody says, money is the root of all evil, again, that is just giving yourself an excuse, basically. I don't want to have loads of money because I don't want it to change me. Well, what? I was going to ask
this actually. So when you're working on people's confidence, whether it be, women, men, young people, older people, do you find that when you start to talk to people about creating wealth and having more financially, that they push back with, but I don't want it because actually if I have it, I'm not sure who I'll become. Do you get a lot of that? Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely, because it's the stories we tell ourselves to justify us staying where we are or not moving very much further from where we are, because we think it's going to change our friendship dynamic. We think it's going to change our family dynamic. Exactly. Rather than actually saying, I'm on the way up and guess what? You're coming with me. Rather than you're on the way down, I'm going to come down there with you. And I think that once we actually realise the stories we tell ourselves are the excuses that we give ourselves. And the biggest excuse we ever give begins with the word because usually is followed by some limiting behavior that justifies us not doing the scary things that we need to do in order to get to where we want to get to. Because going from where we are to really where we want to get to by being really, really honest with ourselves about how much money we want to have, the kind of lifestyle we want to have, how much work, what that work is, how much we want to give to others, etc., is a scary thing to do because there becomes a gap. There becomes a gap between where you are and where you want to get to. And for some people, that gap creates a sense of excitement. I want to fill that gap with activity to help me to get to there. But for other people, they just see a big lack. I don't have what I need in order to get there. Therefore, I have to justify why I want to stay here. Yeah.
Interesting. I think I totally agree with you. And again, like with the clients that I work with, we have very similar conversations. And I think the gap, there is always a gap in between where we want to be and where we are today. And actually that's filled by knowledge, information, asking questions, like all of, and doing, implementing, learning, maybe making some mistakes along the way, which we've all done. I think the thing with money, when we're trying to fill that gap, in my experience with clients and the conversations we have, even in my own experiences, in learning how we have to risk. We have to take risks when money is concerned, especially in the investing world, but in the business world, even moving from one job to another job for a bigger pay rise, right? There's a gap in all of those things. Yeah. And I think that taking a risk is often people's challenge. Like, is it going to be worth it? And because there's no evidence that it will be worth it, they can think it'll be worth it, but there's no evidence of it, like proof of it. Actually, it's easier to just stay where they are, right?
Absolutely. And something you said there reminded me, one of the reasons why people fail to progress in the way that they want to is their lack of confidence to ask questions, and their lack of confidence to ask questions because they don't want to be seen to not have that knowledge. And I put that directly at the door of primary schools where you start off, when you're 4 or 5 and you first go to school, and the teacher will say, who knows what day comes after Tuesday? Me, miss, I know. And then actually after a little while, okay, Lesley, be quiet. Okay, let somebody else answer. Lesley, you're being too loud. Lesley, calm down. And all of a sudden you get the message, I talk too much.
That was my message.
Loud. Exactly. I won't ask any more questions. So even when you don't understand something a little bit later on in school, you're thinking, actually, I'm too loud. I shouldn't ask that question. I need to give somebody else. And that is the problem. We have it knocked out of us that asking questions, being curious, is absolutely what we should be at all ages of life. Because there's going to be, at all stages of life, things that younger people are more comfortable and confident with than we are when we're older. Doesn't mean we can't ask younger people, so tell me about AI and how you use it, or tell me about Bitcoin, what do you know about it, rather than, well, I can't ask that question because I should know the answer. And that goes directly back to us kind of being told it's not okay to ask questions, it's not okay to be curious. But the more curious we are, the more questions we ask, the more information that we have that we can take action on.
I 100% agree with that, actually. And I like, as you're talking, I'm remembering school, and I was told I was too loud. I asked too much. I mean, I was a little bit naughty at school. Like, hands up, anyone listening to this that I was at school at. I definitely wasn't the most well-behaved kid at school. But honestly, I think I was probably a little bit bored. And I'm obviously very entrepreneurial. I'm very high energy. I'm like all of this all the time. I just don't think it was fast enough for me, school. Like, I just wanted to get to the end. Whereas I was told often, like, you're too loud, you can't have opinions, like, your voice, no one wants to hear your voice. Like, that was taught, like, drilled into me forever. I mean, now I'm a public speaker for a living, and my voice is literally what makes me my money. It's how I've made my money for nearly 11 years, right? So, it's so easy to pick up on things when we're growing up, and even into adulthood, that stops us from, like you say, being curious, asking questions. And one of the things that, one of the girls that works for me, Shamila, she's incredible. She's a lot of the glue that holds a lot of this stuff together behind the scenes. She's 25, I believe, at this point. I think she might be 24, 25-ish, let's just say ish. And I quite often, in her 20s, and I quite often say to her, I don't know what this means. Explain that to me. Or there's this word I've heard that the kids are using. I'm like, I don't get it. Explain that to me. Or I'll say, if I put this online, am I going to sound like an old lady? Like, and she like helps me to understand whether or not I'm being very millennial, because I'm a millennial, or whether actually I'm going to link up with the younger audience, which is actually a lot of who we want to connect with from the Money Mechanics brand. But that curiosity, it goes both ways, right? It's okay for parents, for adults, for grown-ups, grandparents, even, older people, to be saying, I don't understand this and I want to understand this. And not just accept that, well, I'm old, so I'm just not going to bother because I've run out of time. I don't think it's ever too late to understand money better. Do you think?
I totally agree with you. Totally agree. And that is why I like, although he speaks way too fast for me, I like what Martin Lewis does in terms of breaking everything down, because there's not very many programs that really deal with the minutiae of money, understanding the different things with student loans and the different things with energy tariffs and all of that. And, he's given people permission to ask those questions, but you shouldn't need permission. You should just say, I don't know the answer. Who can I go to? Who will give me the answer? Now, there has to be, obviously, in that, a sense of asking the right person the answer, not just any person, and, taking them, at face value. So you do need to make sure, and this is something, I always encourage with my children and my clients, it is about finding trusted advisors. And those trusted advisors, and I'm not talking necessarily about, financial advisors per se, etc., but who is the trusted advisor in your circle. My boys are 17 and 19 now. And, I wouldn't necessarily say, go and ask your 17-year-old, your best friend, where you should be investing your money right now, because they may not know the right answers. Now, they may also know the right answer, but you need to have some credibility and you need to have, some evidence of that. And I can give you a really good example of this. I went to a launch at a school 2 weeks ago where 3 16-year-olds were launching their own not-for-profit business, which was about teaching 13 to 16-year-olds about money. Now, they have trusted advisors who've created the content for them, so the content is spot on, but they're delivering that content to the 13 to 16-year-olds because I recognise, as a middle-aged woman, a teenager is probably less likely to listen
100%.
to what I have to say than they do to somebody who is their age, understands what they're going through, etc. So they've gone through their due diligence to find the right trusted advisors in order to create a bank of content that is relevant and correct for the audience that they are working with, basically. And
I love that idea.
I know, isn't it? And they are.
Do you remember the name of them? Do you remember the name of them?
Is Wimbledon Park School, and the company is called Aspire. Aspire.
It'd be really interesting to include their details in the show notes, because I would love to get. I'd love to get them on the podcast and talk to them about their. That'd be amazing.
Yeah,
that'd be really cool.
Who is the chief founder? He's the chief exec of the company. I've introduced him to Louise Hill, the founder of Go Henry. He has met some really high flyers. He's taking this so seriously. He will come on your podcast at a drop of a hat, no problem at all.
We'll get him on. That sounds amazing.
And I'll introduce you.
So, Lesley, let's talk a little bit about how. So, when I was doing the research for my book, when I wrote it, I did a load of digging into UK workforce and how money impacts the way that we work, right? And I know this is a big topic of yours. So, my numbers that I've read, and again, the data might be different depending on what papers you read, etc., is that over 50% of the UK workforce lose sleep over worrying about money on a multiple times a week basis. So more than 50% of the UK workforce are losing sleep every week on more than one occasion, worrying about how much money they've got, debt, whether they can afford Christmas, kids' birthdays, that sort of stuff. How do you think that is directly impacting UK companies' performance?
Very, very significantly, because up until recently, corporates have kind of had this view that, if an employee has, any financial concerns, they leave it at home. They cross over the office threshold and they get on with their office job. And that simply, is not true. Something like 75% of corporate employees are worrying about money, at any single point in time. And, that can come down to not being able to rely on the same pay rises as they were previously, being concerned, is AI going to take my job? Corporates seeing financial well-being as, have you got a company pension and have you signed up to the healthcare scheme? That's not financial well-being. That's financial products, very different from well-being. And if you are concerned about credit card bills, if you are concerned about moving from your fixed mortgage rate to all of a sudden, a much higher rate because mortgage rates have gone up, then significantly you're going to be impacted. That means that productivity, absenteeism, presenteeism, they're all being affected because you're no longer able to be fully focused on the job in hand. You lose the creativity, you lose that ability to be future thinking, future forward, because you're too concerned about your here and now. Corporates are starting to wake up to that, but the level of impact it is having on our productivity as a nation is it's being misunderstood. You know, we know productivity rates are down, but when you look at the number of young people that are, you know, that are not in employment, they're not in training, they're unemployed and they're claiming benefits. What is that, first of all, doing to their psyche? What is that doing to them in terms of their own self-belief and self-value, ambition, what's possible for me? But they're taking out of the pot before they even put into the pot. So who is going to put into that pot going forward? None of that is being addressed at all. And in a corporate environment, an employed environment, where the conversations are not being had because people don't like talking about money. Very often.
Because it's bad manners.
It's bad manners, but also
even my nan says to me now, like, and I do what I do for a living, and I have a podcast and a book and all these things. Even now, she says to me, Sarah, I really wish you could be as successful as you are, but I really wish you would stop talking about money and how much money you've got and how much you earn. And I'm like, Nana, I literally couldn't do what I do unless I talked about how much money I've got, because that's the whole point of what I do, is to try and break this pattern that is definitely generational, I think.
Yeah. But also, though, part of the reasons why corporates don't want people to talk about it is because of the disparity between what people are earning. So if you know, if you and I are sitting side by side, and you know, and I say to you, oh God, you know, I've got a 10 grand bonus coming in this month, you go, what? I've only got. So they actually stop people. There are clauses in contracts. We are not allowed to talk about your package.
When I was in recruitment, I asked someone in my office how much they earned, like what their salary was. Again, I was young. I didn't really know what the rules were. And I said to them, so what's your basic salary? Because we would we'd won a contract and there was all this commission, but I wanted to know whether we were earning the same. And my boss basically jumped in on the conversation and said, don't answer that. Pulled me into the office, sat me down and said, you can't ask that question in an office. You're not allowed to ask your colleagues what their wages are. It's against company policy. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. I won't then. That's fine. But I never at the time, as a young 20-something girl, I never really thought to challenge it because I didn't really know that I could. You know, I didn't have a voice then that was confident enough to challenge that. Well, why? But also, I just took it as gospel that that's what you did. You just didn't do it. Just wasn't allowed to happen. And I think you're right, that disparity, that comparison, that exposure of what is in fact a massive problem in corporate, in not all corporates, but in a lot of them, is definitely a big part of the reason, for sure. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And we kind of then, you know, we go through, you know, our younger adulthood and then going into older adulthood thinking, can't talk about it. And when we've got problems, we can't talk about them. And, you know, COVID exposed this for a lot of people because obviously people were put on furlough or people lost their jobs. Those on furlough were paid, you know, a minimum. They didn't have the ability to do overtime like they readily used to, etc. So spending more time at home, you know, food bills going up, etc., etc. But being expected to manage, and that managing just got bigger and bigger and bigger and turned into not managing at all. And that has led to, you know, a big stigma around people not feeling that they can say, I've got a problem. I am struggling. And part of that comes down to company culture around not talking about these things, not sharing when you have a problem. And because AI is thrown into the mix and people making assumptions, AI must mean I'm going to lose my job. No, AI does not mean necessarily you're going to lose your job. The way you do your job might change, but actually if companies were more open for people, and this is why, some companies invite me in, some invite me in to talk about the financial well-being side, others invite me in to talk about more how does judgment change when financial pressure is applied, basically.
So you mean judgment as in decision making and choices in their roles, right? Got it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely that. Because
tell us a bit about that. Like, how does judgment change when financial pressures are on in the real world?
So a lot of what is showing up for people, what they're worried about, what if I make the wrong decision? How's that going to look on me? How is that going to affect other people? What is the knock-on effect of that decision going to have on the next thing that we have to do? If you have a tendency to micromanage because you're worried now about this decision that has to come down the line, you're micromanaging people. Your team are then feeling that pressure. Well, why all of a sudden is he or she acting in that way? Well, do they know something that we don't know? Oh my God, is there going to be redundancies announced? What happens if I've spotted something that's being done and it's not being done correctly? Am I going to get into trouble for saying, well, actually, this is happening and it shouldn't be happening? So all of a sudden, the communication, the culture becomes fearful and people start to misstep, overthink, kick a big decision down the road so they can spend more time thinking about a smaller decision, looking for more data, wanting to have more meetings. So all of a sudden, the time delays, the knock-on effect that has ends up costing the bottom line money as well. So people feel challenged, they act in a challenged way, and it starts becoming a little bit like a domino effect, basically, purely because you didn't have a conversation, you didn't understand how other people were feeling, you didn't do a temperature test that said, we're doing this because of this. People jumped to their own conclusions, and the conclusion they came to was the wrong conclusion, but in their mind, redundancies are coming, I better start looking for another job. I better start defocusing on this job, because
it perpetuates that cycle of negative thinking, negative relationship, all of the things it perpetuates, which just gets worse and worse.
Exactly.
This is really interesting. So if someone's listening to this and is an employer, whether corporate, managing a team, self-employed, managing a business, whatever, but is an employer of people, how can they start to make their staff feel more comfortable having these conversations? Like, is there advice on this that you've got?
Absolutely. So the first thing is to understand, how do you make a decision? Are you making a decision, so a financial decision? How do you make a financial decision? So the last financial decision you made, did you make it with your head or your heart? And the more you recognize... the more you recognise it's made largely with the heart, you can start to work out your emotional assets and your emotional liabilities, and how your own emotional assets, your own emotional liabilities show up in the conversations you have, show up in your behaviours, and the effect that they have on other people. So, an example, you have somebody who has been part of your team, part of your company, forever and a day. They were brilliant at their job. They brought in some, really good accounts, for example, but they're now a lot older and they're a lot more set in their ways, and they're not as responsive, and they don't take feedback particularly well, and they're starting to wind up other members of the team, and the culture's starting to be affected. But you do remember that back in the day they were really helpful. Well, what do you do as a boss? Do you feel out of loyalty you let them stay when you know it's affecting the morale of the rest of the team? Do you have a conversation with that person and you suggest that maybe there's some training they need to go on to allow them to interact better, with other people in a pressured environment? Or do you, you're honest and say, well, actually, maybe the time has come where we look for a different role for you, or you look for a different role, or consider retirement. And once you actually sort of work through, where's my head ruling these decisions? What effect is it having on the wider team? And how is that effect going to show up ultimately in our budget, in our bottom line? How can we do things differently before that problem is so big it actually has a knock-on effect that we're not even considering right now? And
That's really
whenever I
interesting.
run these workshops, the leaders, within the workshop actually go, do you know, I can actually think of an example just last week when this happened, or I can remember when this happened. Because when you start to make those logical connections, you realise that our judgment becomes affected when we're feeling pressurised. And right now, we know that companies have never been under bigger tax and national insurance pressure than they're on. We know with the employee rights bills that are coming in, companies are not looking to take on so many people. If you're not taking on people, what does that usually mean? More work for the people that are there. If they're not getting the pay rises, they're going, hang on a minute, I'm taking on more work, I'm not being paid more. Do I really want this shit in my life? So that's why having those lines of communication and being really honest about what's expected has never been more important than it is right now.
So I was talking to a employer recently, and they've got quite a large company. I'd say they're probably they're not corporate large. They're probably about a 10 million turnover business. So big enough, right? They've got staff, they've got teams of people. And we were having a conversation where I was saying, it would be really beneficial for you to educate your staff around investment, around financial stability and security. Because in my opinion, if I can retain my staff because they're not leaving to go to £1,000 a year pay rise because they've not got enough money, or they're struggling with debt, or, whatever's happening over here, and it means I can retain them, it saves my company money in the long run, because I can have a better team, more consistent service, etc. And this employer said to me, I will never educate my staff about investment and good money management because I want them to be desperate to come to work, like they can't afford to be there. And I think that's the wrong headspace. For me, like, I want my staff to come to work because they choose to. They could afford to be anywhere, but they want to come and work here. And I want them, actually most of my team are quite young, so they're starting to invest, they're learning about it and things like that. But I think that I want you to have a income from investments so that you don't really need a job, you choose your job. And I think maybe this is a bit of a utopian view around how I wish that all employers and employees were. Wouldn't it be amazing? I believe in a world that everybody goes to work with enough money from investment, which actually, if we start early enough in our lives, we could all have, but that's another conversation for later. And we end up choosing a career that is a career that's like our calling and what we love, not what we have to do. And we don't have to work for people who want us to feel desperate to be there because we can't afford to not be there. And this conversation with this person, it was quite a tough conversation for me because we had such opposing views around the attitude towards money and good stability with money. How do you find, when you're going and reaching out to employers to talk about delivering workshops and things like that, do you find that most employers are engaging with helping employees be better with money? Or do you think a lot of them are still in that headspace of, nah, fuck them, I want them to be here because they've got to be here and I want it to be like they can't afford to leave? Which headspace do you think most employers are in this day and age? Like, what do you think about that?
Largely, I haven't come across the attitude that, of I want them to be desperate, and I just think that is horrendous.
Good. Well, that's good. Really bad. It was a really hard conversation for me to remain professional in.
if you are going to find that you're not going to have the level of engagement, you're not going to have your back looked after, etc.
This is what I was trying to explain at the time.
Yeah, with that attitude. And, I know somebody who has just sold their company to a much bigger organisation. And the people within his organisation, they all now retain ownership of that smaller company. He's basically said, you are now all, co-owners. He retains the larger share, but you are all co-owners, basically, because his attitude is, you have helped create this organisation that a bigger company has wanted to purchase us, and he will continue to work for the larger organisation, as will the employees in his company. That kind of attitude, that makes you feel a whole lot better. You go to bed at night knowing that you have done good, and
your contribution is massive.
A massive, oxytocin, and all of that. Whereas if you've got that, attitude of, I want people starving so they appreciate the drops of gruel I give to them.
Basically the attitude, yeah.
Exactly. We know exactly. We know what happened, to the woman that it wasn't a woman who Mr. Bumble, I think it was. When Oliver said, "Please, sir, can I have some more?" or whatever. No, fortunately, most corporates obviously have a lot of pressure to maintain and grow their bottom line. So they are looking at what can we do to support our leaders to ensure they don't only understand the finances, and they don't only understand the levers that create more sales and more productivity, that they actually understand the behaviour that drives success as well. Because very often the teams that I work with, it's not a lack of experience, it's not a lack of knowledge around what they do, it's having an understanding of how they do what they do, the effect that it has on their team, their culture, their communication. And once you understand creating a win-win situation, then people will go over and above for you. And that's the environment everybody wants to be in, where people will go over and above because they recognise they will get a share of the results in some way as well. And I think, fortunately, all the companies that I've worked with, they do recognise their people are more than resources. Yes, they're human, but they're more than resources. And I think once you recognise that, then you're halfway to getting to a point where you can ask more, but when you ask more, you have to give more as well.
And I think this is really interesting, and I am pleased to hear that in your experience, most of the people you're talking to don't have the attitude of this person that I was speaking to. But then I suppose that's indicative of what you do for a living, because they wouldn't be talking to you if they felt like it was a pointless thing anyway. So the fact that there's your business and other businesses that deliver these sorts of education programs into corporates around financial stability, wellness, etc., but also that confidence around money, that communication that sits when we're not worrying about stuff that's going on at home, it gives me hope that there is hope for the world, and actually that not everybody's the same as this person that I was talking to. Lesley, I could sit and talk to you about this all day, but we are absolutely running out of time. So if people want to understand, my last question to you is this similar to what I've asked about employers, but from an employee perspective. If someone's listening to this thinking, do you know what? I go to work every day and I am worried about money, and I am losing sleep, and I am not sure how to ask for support or get guidance or help. How can people, or what's the advice around maybe approaching a boss to say, do you know what? I actually just need to talk this through. Like, I need a bit of help. And I'm not necessarily saying, how do you ask for a pay rise? Because a pay rise isn't always feasible or possible, but support, education, other things, there are lots of things available. What would you say to somebody that's in those shoes about what they could do next to kind of start to move out of that place?
Yeah. I think it comes down to understanding what you are asking for, and where the organisation is on their journey around what you are asking for. Because I think assumptions can be made with regards to, well, this is what I need, therefore I have to ask for it, and therefore the company has a black and white yes or no. Well, actually, no, it's not based on a black and white yes or no. It's based on what that organisation's own requirements are at that point in time. So if you are struggling, financially, who is a trusted person you can go and have a conversation with in your organisation? Because you will not be the only person that will be having those thoughts.
Yeah, for sure.
There will be others who are equally having those thoughts, and recognising that there is no shame in asking for help. There's no shame in asking for advice. If it can come down to you need to make more money, then understand, where that organisation is in terms of what can it offer you? Can it restructure your job? Can it offer you overtime? Under what circumstances might it consider giving you a pay rise? So actually understand that going to ask for something is a negotiation, but understanding what you actually need, how you can go about it, and understanding where your line in the sand actually is. Because I think we all have this view that, our employer, when they say no, they're saying it from a place of, how dare you? The answer is no, you don't deserve it. Rather than it's a case of, well, I can't right now because of X, Y, and Z, but come back to me in 6 months' time. Let's have that conversation again. And maybe in the meantime, if you could do X, Y, and Z, that would put you in a better position. But I think talk to somebody. Talking is the key way to understand how to solve a problem and who you can speak to help you to solve that problem. Because most of the time, the thing that we're afraid of, starting that conversation, is actually far, far easier. We make it to be, a bigger deal. I had a conversation with a client last week who needed to speak to HMRC, and they were really, really scared about speaking to HMRC. And I said, no, just ring them up. Explain the situation that you are in, and I know you will get a good sounding board, because HMRC want you to pay what you owe them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Declaring your company insolvent or whatever is not going to help them.
Not going to get paid, yeah.
Exactly. So they what? And they called me up afterwards and said, "I'm not going to believe this." But they were really lovely. They did everything they possibly could. I said, exactly. How long did you spend worrying about that? And I think that is the thing. 95% of what we worry about never comes past.
Never happens.
How much time do we spend worrying? So talk to somebody, work out what you really need, and find a route to either get what you really need or put a line in the sand that says, I'm not going to get it here. I'm going to try a different route instead.
Really good advice. Thank you so much for answering that. So at the end of all of our podcasts, we have a question that's been given to us by a previous guest, which we're going to ask you, and then we're going to ask you for a question for our next guest. We don't tell you who it is. You're just going to have to ask the question and we'll ask it. So the question for you, I've got it in my phone here, is there an amount of money that you think is enough money?
No. I don't know, because I think it will vary on where you are in life and how you want to help others, along the way. And this is something I very often will say to clients, because clients will say, well, I don't need to earn any more money. I have all I need. And I say, well, yeah, but what happens if you want to be able to support your children, or you want to be able to, give back to
something else,
local community, or, or whatever it might be. So, it's a great question. But for me, because the world is changing so much and has changed so much. And what I mean by that is, for example, when I bought my first house at 24, it was £56,000. And that was for a 3-bedroom, end of terrace house.
Everyone listening to this that's any younger than me is going to hate you right now for that.
I know. Exactly. My children. Okay. So information came out last week. Okay. The average house is now 300,000. The average salary is 38,000.
Yeah.
Santander brought out a first-time mortgage where the multiplier is 4.75 times your salary. That means to buy an average house, you have to have a salary of 67,500. So you have to have a way above average salary for an average house. So there isn't a number I would put on that, because financial numbers have changed so much that my parents would never and didn't need to support me to buy my first house. I suspect we will have to support our children to buy their first house. So for me, things are so fluid, and also psychologically, I never want to give myself a ceiling that says
really
that's my enough number, because my enough number changes.
I love that. Really good. So thank you very much for answering that. What is your question that you want to leave for our next guest?
Now, I don't know who your next guest is, but I'm going to ask a question that I was asked a few weeks ago.
Okay, cool.
Literally being filmed. I went to an event at the House of Commons where we were celebrating financial literacy being included, on the school curriculum. And I was being videoed, being asked a series of questions. And the question I was asked was, if your teenage child was given £1,000, what would you tell them to do with it?
So what would you tell them to do? And then we'll ask the next guest as well.
Okay. So my answer surprised the lady asking, because everybody had said I'd tell them to invest it. And I said, no, I would suggest they invested 80% of it. And I would suggest they enjoyed 20% of it. And they could decide what to do with that 20%. They might decide to save it. They might decide to just blow it on whatever they decided to blow it on. But when we tell children what to do around money, resentment builds up. When we give them a choice,
blocks.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. When we give them choice, that is when they are most likely to do better with it, basically. So that's what my response was.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Lesley, if people want to get hold of you, contact you, whether it's employers, want workshops, or employees want to just talk you through or find you online, how can people get hold of you?
The easiest way is go to my website, themoneyconfidenceacademy.com, because it's got all my social media on there. It's got my email address, which is Lesley@themoneyconfidenceacademy.com. But just remember the one thing, www.moneyconfidenceacademy.com, and then it's always to get hold of me via that.
Amazing. I'll make sure all of that's in the show notes as well.
Brilliant.
Lesley, thank you so much for your time today. It's been amazing talking to you. It's been a really good conversation. I've loved it. And thanks for your time.
Thank you, Sarah. Take care.
Thank you so much for getting to the end of the podcast episode. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I just wanted to take this opportunity to remind you that the weekly Money Mechanics newsletter is available to you completely free. This is a newsletter I'm going to send out every week to just give you some ideas around what's happening in the markets, what's happening at a global level, what's happening at a lot more local level, so that you can better understand what you can do with your money to make it work for you for the future. I'm also going to share in the newsletter what I'm doing in my own portfolio, just to give you some insights into what my ideas are, why I'm making the decisions that I'm making, in the hope that it will help you to make those decisions in your own portfolios as well. All you've got to do is find the link that's with this episode, hit the link and subscribe, and that newsletter will start to come out to you every single week. I'd also really love to take this opportunity to invite you to drop me a review. I love the opportunity of getting to share these podcast episodes with you. It really helps me to better understand how we can do the best job that we can here at Money Mechanics if you tell us your feedback. So drop us a review, tell us the sort of guests that you want, talk to me and connect with me on Instagram, talk to us on YouTube, wherever you are hanging out. Tell us how you're finding it, and we can make this the very best podcast it can be. Thank you again for being such a valued listener. I appreciate you all, and I'll speak to you soon.